Hey, howdy, hey! Welcome to the very fourth episode of Very Special Guest. We're back in the studio today. I'm your host, Phineas Nutting. I've got my technical producer in the booth now too, Blue, who you might remember from episode 2 of Very Special Guest, and very special guest this week. Who are you?
My name is Ethan Hacker. I am a transfer student at Champlain College, which puts me somewhere in between junior and senior year here.
That sounds very exciting. I've started at the school from the very beginning, so I've been born and bred here for my college years.
Nice.
But
well, was it fun being a freshman here?
Freshman year at Champlain it was COVID years, so it was very much so like, oh, pick one friend. That's the only person you can enter the room of. And it was a little bit chaotic there. But aside from like that, it was relatively nice. How's the transfer experience been?
It's been good for the most part. I found everyone here to be super welcoming, especially in my major. So, it's been really good.
We have the best major.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Sorry, creative media people.
Yeah, sorry guys. Too bad. Yeah, I mean, after kind of spending the last couple years of COVID, like, isolated, as many of us did, it's nice to come back into a community that feels welcoming and that feels excited to, make films at the least,
Well, I think there's something magical about, like, whenever you create art in, like, any capacity, like, it's just, you want to make something for the world, and making films is usually a pretty not too bad time, usually.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've worked on only on-campus film shoots and stuff, but I know that you have industry experience.
Yep. I've spent a few years working in the industry. That was before I came here. So my story is I went to the Savannah College of Art and Design that was my freshman year of college was there, and then halfway through my sophomore year, and then I ended up getting a gig in the industry, and it ended up becoming a union gig, and I ended up joining the union down there, and started working.
See, that's just amazing, though. What was your first gig on?
So my first gig was on a show called Florida Girls. I think it was on Pop Network.
That's one of those like obscure cable networks that nobody usually.
Yeah, I think they have a streaming service now. I'm not entirely sure about it. But yeah, I was hired as a day player grip. So I showed up when they needed extra people, basically, and that's how I got started.
Well, that's gotta be exciting, at least. Like, honestly, it's the industry, which is fun.
Yeah.
How long have you done grip kind of stuff on sets?
Professionally for like 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess since I'm in school now, I'm kind of taking a break from that. But when I can, I've taken on indie projects. I recently did an indie project as a key grip, so that was nice. Low budget thing down in Georgia.
And also, just for those in the audience of the podcast who don't know what being a grip is, do you want to explain what being a grip is? Yeah,
so the grip department, a lot of people explain it in different ways, but the way I explain it is it's two-faceted. One part is dealing with all non-electrical lighting, so that's flags and diffusion and rigging and support, and curtains and backdrops and all that kind of stuff. And then the other facet of it is camera support. So anything that is not on a handheld or moving platform like a Steadicam or on a tripod, dollies, cranes, cable cam systems, anything like that is usually set up by the grips.
That's honestly got to be a very exciting like gig when it comes to it's probably a little scary. I'm assuming not much have you seen a lot of stuff happen with it?
I mean, yeah, certainly there are safety hazards involved. I mean, among the trades within the film industry, grip, I guess, since we work with a lot of heavy machinery and big heavy metal parts can people can be prone to injury, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's completely fair. What other projects have you worked on as a grip?
Okay, so let me try to remember. So I did Florida Girls. I did this very small movie called, or maybe it's not small, maybe it got a little bigger. Richard Dreyfuss film called Crime Story. I did a couple of Hallmark movies.
Must have been a hallmark of your career.
Yeah, I guess so. And then I did a show called The Righteous Gemstones, which was hilarious. It was a great show to work on. It's Danny McBride and John Goodman and Walton Goggins and and then I did a season of Outer Banks. So that was the first season of that show. Yeah.
I've not watched any of it, but the only one that I've heard of, like, from before when I started talking to you, because we've known each other for, like, roughly 2 semesters now, because we met through the documentary class.
Yeah.
The only one that I've heard about is Outer Banks, because, like, I think isn't it, like, a really popular show or something?
I think, and I could be wrong, that it was, like, the #1 show on Netflix in the United States for like a month, if not maybe the worldwide for like a couple weeks.
That makes sense. It's one of those. It's a kind of a teen drama, right? Or
yeah, a lot of people have compared it to Riverdale. I would say if anyone's familiar with the show Friday Night Lights, a lot of the same people are associated with Friday Night Lights that are associated with Outer Banks.
Mm-hmm.
It has I'd say a similar feel. I've always loved Friday Night Lights. I thought it was a great show. So
I've never seen it before, but I've heard the name in many passing conversations and stuff.
Yeah.
So feel free. So, do you have any fun stories or like interesting stories that you'd like to share from working in the industry, or
fun or interesting stories working in the industry? I don't know. I'd have to think a minute to find a specific fun story, but one of the great days on Outer Banks was when we were shooting on the tarmac of an airport in South Carolina, and we had this big blue propeller plane, and the scene, if anyone's seen the show, is a big blue propeller plane is taking one of the characters, her dad is taking her off the island with a bunch of gold. And our main character is in his van and races down the tarmac and cuts the plane off. So filming that scene involved a vehicle called a grip tricks, which is imagine like a go-kart, and a big heavy-duty electric go-kart with a big metal cage around it with a bunch of holes drilled in it.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, it was fun, and so the holes allow for you to rig pipe and fittings onto it so that you can mount a stabilized camera head. So and it can go pretty fast down the road. So our Grip Tricks driver was we were doing follow shots and leading shots and all sorts of stuff with the plane and the van and the Grip Tricks.
I'm also like so impressed with the kinds of shots that y'all are like trained to get and stuff, because like for me, because I focus with film on like the writing and directing side a little bit more, and just I'm impressed with the technicality of what y'all, especially in the industry, are able to like get done and stuff. How long were you in Atlanta for, by the way, for like working on sets?
So I was in Savannah. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was in Savannah. So I went to school there for a year and a half, and then for like 2 more years after that, almost 2 more years after that, I was there working. But I spent a lot of time in Charleston, South Carolina, working up there and staying up there. So when COVID hit, I guess that was the time. My lease was up down there, so I decided, come back home, finish school up here.
Mm-hmm. That's very exciting. So are you from Vermont? Or
mm-hmm.
that?
I'm from Vermont. I was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but when I was very little, we spent most of our time in Vermont, so we just decided to move here.
Honestly, it's a lovely state.
It is.
Especially like the city of Burlington. It's just there's so much going on here, and it's great.
I have a lot of memories of like being in like middle school and high school, coming up to concerts here. Remember we saw like a lot of music at Higher Ground. I saw a show at the Memorial Auditorium before. There were some festivals on Main Street, and I have a lot of good memories of coming up here to see music.
That's awesome. What kind of music do you enjoy the most?
All kinds of music. I mean, what have I been listening to recently? I've been listening to Alanis Morissette. Her album Jagged Pill. That's my album that I really am into right now. Kind of stuff from the 90s that I've been listening to recently. But I don't know. I like Joy Division. Cage the Elephant is one of my bands that my desert island bands.
Okay, I only recently started getting into some of the Cage the Elephant stuff. I forget what the song. Oh, it's like the dun 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 cold as ice. What's the name of it?
I think it's the song's called Cold Cold Cold.
Yeah, no, it showed up in a lot of my playlists, and I was like, hey, they're pretty good.
Yeah. So yeah, I remember listening to them in high school a lot, and yeah. So
I have personally like no taste in music. Well, I have a taste, but like I don't know what most of the bands are. I've got friends who will be like, "Oh, this band's pretty cool." Friends including my technical producer and stuff, and I'll be like, "What's that?"
Yeah.
It
doesn't mean you don't have a taste in music though.
Yeah.
I think everyone's got a taste in music.
Well, that's so valid. I'm impressed with what any kind of like musician does and stuff, because they're just working with audio as a form, and like I guess that's what podcasters and stuff do now too. But it's just with musicians, it's so like you're trying for something for such a short term and such. That's pretty impressive. Pretty impressive. Do you play music too, or?
Yeah. I grew up playing music. I started playing piano when I was like 6. I was never very good at music lessons. So I didn't stick with my teacher, unfortunately. I probably should have for longer. I was a kind of a defiant 6-7-year-old, as you were, but I kept playing. Yeah. I kept playing, and I picked up guitar, and that's kind of my primary instrument.
No, that's so understandable. It's so weird because like whenever someone's trying to teach a kid like a kind of music, it's always like, oh, have like these little baby songs and stuff to start with. And I might be completely wrong, but I feel like the best way for someone to like learn music or something is to just throw in trying to do what you want to do and slowly building the way to work on that versus going from the essentials in. Because like I took piano lessons from the ages of 6 to like, I'm pretty sure I got like 6 years in and stopped around like middle school because I was busy with theater and other things. But I think it's always such an interesting like time taking piano lessons and stuff, or taking instrument lessons, because it's just such a unique way of like learning it versus like learning on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I always think, I always say everyone's got a sense of rhythm in you. I mean, as long as you have a functioning heartbeat, you've got a functioning rhythm. So everyone's kind of just intuitively attuned to that. Yeah, I mean, everyone loves music. As someone, sorry, when I'm like, I don't know why I'm sorry. When I'm like listening to music and stuff, it's always interesting because you can kind of like get the beat slowly with songs, and I feel like with music and stuff, the more you listen to songs, you're more like, oh, I know how this might go and stuff. Honestly, it's one of those forms of like entertainment where it's just like, it's so nice that you can like listen to it while you're doing like anything though too, because like with film and stuff, it's so much more of a thing where it's like, I'm less likely to put a film on in the background as much as that's gonna be the foreground and something else maybe than music where it's just like, oh, I can put this in the background for literally everything. Yeah, it's a commitment. Yeah, because I guess music can be sort of integrated into your everyday life, where the whole thing with movies is it's supposed to take you out of your everyday life and put you in somebody else's or another situation. But yeah, I mean, I'll often wake up and put something on and it'll make me feel a certain way, when I'm getting ready in the morning or something. Yeah.
No, I'm
sure you do the same sometimes.
Yeah, I usually will throw on like a podcast or some kind of like musical or something that I'm currently listening to at the time as I walk up to this building from my dorm. Because it's just good to have something because like walking is fun, but walking is boring when it's just you on your own and stuff with it in a place that you're too familiar with. So pivoting the topic to movies, do you so what are your favorite movies?
Okay,
that's a loaded question, so yeah.
I guess so. I mean, as any film majors who are listening know, it's a very difficult question to answer. What's your favorite movie? And that conversation can last hours. But so the thing I always tell people is that I love Cars.
Understandable.
Because it's such a wholesome story, in my opinion, and just kind of like that whole era, that like 2000s, 2010s era Disney Pixar movies. Yep.
It's perfect.
Yeah, I think that's a thing we share in that we both really like those movies. I thought Inside Out was incredible.
That dude, I think Pixar like always hits that out of the park with, well, almost always because Cars 2 kind of exists, and I'm not a big fan of Brave, but like most of the films around that era are so good and stuff. My big one for them was The Incredibles.
Absolutely. Did you like The Incredibles 2?
I actually did. Did you?
Yeah, me too. I thought it was a great sequel.
I think it gets a lot of in like. So the funny thing is, on my last episode of the podcast, we talked about this because my guest wasn't a big fan of it. But I think it was as good as they could have probably put a little more into it. But like for a sequel to The Incredibles, that's such a big thing to do because like The Incredibles is one of the best Pixar films like ever. It's like my third favorite one on the list. I've ranked them all in Letterboxd because I'm a madman. And that was my post immediate quarantine activity, watching every single Pixar film. But that era is so good, and like the directors that work for Pixar are always so great at crafting their stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think they do just such a good job at dealing with, things that are concepts that are innately human and that everyone struggles with, but they do it in such a wholesome, non-controversial way. So that's what I really, I've always appreciated that. And it's not just personal stories. Oftentimes, it can deal with social stories. Like A Bug's Life is a perfect example. You've got the oppressive grasshoppers and the working ants that they realize we're stronger together. So that's always something I was a fan of.
It's the whole thing too is there's such a catalog with their films because like I feel like most of their films are good, but I feel like every person you talk to is gonna have a different favorite Pixar film. My personal favorite of all time is Coco for being just breathtaking and stuff. It's and I'm a big sucker for like musicals and stuff, and the music in that movie is so good. But like I think with very few exceptions, like if anyone told me something else was their favorite Pixar film, I would be like, that's so understandable and that's a fantastic choice. Another one of my favorites is, did you wind up seeing Soul?
Yes, I have seen Soul. Yeah,
that one's so good about going like in depth and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you seen Luca yet too? Or
I have seen Luca.
Luca's amazing. Did you get to see the new one, Turning Red? Or
I haven't seen Turning Red.
That one's fantastic too. Just came out when we're recording this, and it'll have come out like 2 weekends ago if you're seeing this.
Yeah. No, it's definitely something a movie I want to watch. Yeah, Soul was great. I just remember the whole purgatory sequence where you've got all the souls going towards the big white great beyond,
right?
And and I thought the way they did what were these characters called? They were like they're like the chaperones of all the souls in.
I'm blanking on their names and stuff.
I don't know, but I thought that there was Jerry or something.
Yeah,
and Jerry goes back down to Earth.
Literally, they were like all called Jerry or something, or
something
Terry,
like
or
that.
I don't remember for sure because it's been over a year. But Soul's like one of the most recent movies that. Do you ever just watch a movie again right after you finish it because you fell in love with it?
I have not, like directly after it, but I've seen movies multiple times that I really like.
Not directly after. But, like, I watched Soul again the very next night because I had to show some of my friends the movie and stuff, which is something that I rarely do that for movies where I watch it again, like, so soon after the first time. But, like, if I love it that much, it just blew me away. And oh, my gosh, Pixar did such a good job on it.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, and, like, Pixar also does a great job with, like, their franchises and stuff, too, for the most part. I'm not a big fan of like Cars 2, but Cars 3 is a great continuation of the first Cars. If you've seen it, yeah.
My hot take is I think Cars 2 is the best James Bond movie.
I love that take.
So
I still think I don't think it's a great film or anything, but I think it gets overhated in the grand scheme of movies because it's just all right. It's lower on the Pixar scale, but like it's still a fun time, I think.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Dude, the James Bond movies are a very fun ride with each of them, though. I've only seen like a few, though.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't think I'm as familiar as a film student as I should be with the original James Bond movies, but I mean, I saw Spectre and I'm blanking on the other ones. I saw Spectre.
That I haven't seen that one yet. Or well, actually, I have. I just forgot about it because it's been a while. I haven't seen the original. I haven't seen the Daniel Craig James Bond since like Spectre was coming out and stuff. But Skyfall is one of my favorite songs.
Yes, and Skyfall, yeah.
Like that one. Like I'm not the biggest fan of the James Bond films as films, but like I love Skyfall as a song so much.
Yeah, I think it was a great introductory song.
I just love the way that the James Bond movies do their introductions and stuff. Do you have a favorite genre though that you gravitate towards with movies or?
I'd say other than the unique microcosm of the Pixar Disney universe, sci-fi. I'm not super into those Terminator-esque action alien invasion / robot invasion movies, except for The Matrix.
Completely understandable.
Love The Matrix. My favorite sci-fi movie is Arrival. I thought it was incredibly beautiful. One of my favorite cinematographers, Bradford Young, shot Arrival, and I thought he did an incredible job. And I've always liked Denis Villeneuve stuff. I mean, I like Dune and all that, but
I haven't seen too much of his stuff. I remember I watched Arrival with my parents a while back, but I kind of forgot about it at this point. Because I was like, it was just a while. It was a while since its arrival to my mind. But Dune was, I'm a bit more disappointed with Dune than a lot of other people are because I think the story of the film's rather weak, but visually it's such a spectacle that it kind of makes up for it.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to consolidate that book into a movie, and I think I'm hopeful that part 2 will be more exciting. I definitely think the studio and our friend Denis was probably under a lot of pressure to make things appear a certain way.
Absolutely.
So it's difficult because I've seen interviews with him talking about how he just really wanted to do Frank Herbert justice, and it's just, that's so hard. The book is long. It's like 400 or 500 pages long, something like that. So,
well, it's always impressive because like I don't know how any like person who's supposed to adapt a book and like I haven't read Dune, but I've heard it's a pretty beloved like sci-fi book and stuff. It's gonna be so hard to condense that many pages of content down into like an hour and a half or an hour. Well, I feel like film's general runtime is closer to 2 hours nowadays than like 1.5 hours, which is funny to think about because like just years earlier it felt more like it was an hour 30 minutes.
Yeah, I'm seeing that a lot in when there's like a blockbuster shift around the streaming revolution. Maybe it has something to do with theaters wanting to keep people engaged. I don't know. That's just a guess, but yeah, I think movies are tending to get longer. And then there's also this new short, long format mini series thing going on, where it's like effectively a 5-hour feature film divided into five episodes. Which
I love that people just can get the chance to like do and work on if they want to. I need to get through a few of those like more. I need to get through a few more like epic kind of like shows and stuff. But like I watched like WandaVision, like with what Marvel's doing with it and stuff.
WandaVision was great. Yeah,
I haven't watched the rest of Marvel stuff with it, but also like The Mandalorian and stuff too, and the impressive amount of content that they fit into and got done within that one season. Or I've actually watched only the second season of The Mandalorian. Long story there. But it's just impressive what they're able to do within that amount of time and tell for a story, and I'm excited to see it happen more in the future.
Yeah. Have you heard much about the technology they used on The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan? The So it's the volume stage, the XR volume stage.
That's okay. That's so impressive to me that they're able to do that.
Yeah, it's I think the fact that Lucasfilm is kind of pioneering it right now is something that is promising, and the reason I say that is because historically ILM and Lucasfilm have sort of pioneered these cutting-edge VFX technologies that have revolutionized the way that we make and understand how to make movies. One of the things from, like, I guess the perspective of art direction and production design is that there's a new element included, which is the way VFX sets used to be, or CGI sets used to be designed, was there would be a green screen, and that would always serve as the background, and then there would be the foreground elements, which would all be practical. But with the volumetric stage, it's a decision. It's a more nuanced decision between what ends up digital and what ends up foreground, and because the depth and the depth of field is determined by the physical lens size and not by computer programming, there's a lot more opportunity for you to bring elements forwards that would have normally been brought backwards, or push elements backwards that would normally have been brought forwards. So I think it adds to the sense of realism that you see in The Mandalorian and a lot of those other shows.
Well, I feel like with film and stuff, things have like come along such a long way, especially in like the 2010s decade, where we went from films just within this millennium. We went from it's funny to think about that all this change has come within this with the introduction of HD and some of the best looking like CGI we've ever had in films. It's kind of it's pretty impressive that the studios are able to do. I worry about Hollywood right now because, like, writing wise, it's always like I feel like the films are starting to fall into like the same formulas, like even more than they usually do. But from a visuals wise, I think it's hitting such like a golden age and stuff. As far as what you're able to like do with a film, you can manifest anything in it. And it's
what do you think are the best visual developments as far as the images on screen go that you've seen over the past, since you've been a fan of movies?
So I don't pay too much attention to the visuals and stuff. Like, the one that a lot of people always say, and I'm not the biggest fan of this movie, but visually it's spectacular, is like Avatar is a big one and stuff with it. But I feel like it's interesting with how companies have been taking like CGI further and further to feel more alive. Like one movie that I always felt was like so real was like the live action Jungle Book. I actually really like visually and stuff because Jon Favreau is a very good visual filmmaker. I'm not a big fan of some of his films like The Lion King and stuff, but like when it comes to like how things look, he's fantastic for it. And I think one thing, like I'm a fan of Marvel and stuff, so I think they've been doing a lot to push film forward visually and stuff too. What do you think are your favorite developments like?
So I mean, coming from a cinematography perspective, at least, it's really the sensitivity of cameras. When our industry was still shooting on film, in the early days of film, the stocks went up to like 400 tungsten ballast, 400 ISO tungsten balanced film. So it was really necessary to pump a lot of light into scenes. And the LED revolution certainly helped with that. I mean, when we went from like Nook lights to Kino flows to LEDs eventually, it really helped us pump more light into smaller spaces with units that were less cumbersome. But still, sensitivity didn't quite catch up, and we would have a lot of noise that would happen if you tried to boost your ISO. But now we have cameras that are shooting low light or dual native ISO. So you can get clear images if you're shooting at like ISO 3200. So for cameras like the Gemini, the Red Gemini, and the Alexa LF and the LF Mini, just simply because they have larger film planes, we're able to pump more light into the cameras with less units. So you could literally just light a room with a lamp that's sitting on a table. And that's something that, like, one of the reasons I really love Bradford Young is because that's what he'd do, is he just used such small units, like little 2-foot LED tubes. In Arrival, there's this great scene where they're in this military tent, and the walls are just like this white tarp-like material. And the way the scene was lit, it was just a bunch of hanging, I think they were quasars or asteras or something, like 2-foot tubes that were just pointing into the ceiling, and it just gives like this very low-level ambience. And that's the thing is we see, because we see a lot better in the dark, seeing more information in movies that are in darkness brings a whole new scope of possibilities as far as cinematography goes. So I'm grateful for technology, that it's camera technology, that it's evolving in that direction. I have not seen The Descent. It's on my list, though. I have to see it. That's awesome. Yeah, I gotta check it out. Sure.
Was your audio captured or?
Probably.
Cool. Yeah, I'm not worried either. Well, it's really impressive because like it's so funny because we had like I feel like people were faking like their like darkness and stuff with a lot of like found footage style movies and stuff, and like a thing for me with films, it's always weird when it goes like too dark, which I feel like a lot of films have the problem where it's like so dark where it's like, oh, how do I see a lot of these things? And it's nicer to see. I feel like films are getting a little more. It just feels a little more nuanced nowadays versus just the constant stream of blacks and stuff to look at. Cough any darker and edgier like superhero movie and stuff that they like always are doing.
Do you remember a few years ago I don't know if you've watched Game of Thrones, but there was this big scandal around the final battle scene in Game of Thrones and how it was way too dark and everyone was so upset about it. And there was all these jokes going around it, how the DP his Fabian Wagner, I think, was incapable, uneducated, unable to perform. But that's so untrue, because if you look at the behind the scenes photos, you see they've got like multiple 20 by 20 soft boxes hanging above a giant set and everything. But one of the big issues is that TVs are not calibrated correctly, and they're not. There's not enough information about how to properly set up your TV, or where to put the lights in your room around your TV, and reflections and all that.
That's such an interesting thing to think about, because like also frequently the consumers of like any piece of media usually think that it's an issue with the piece of media in question instead of it could be an issue with their own like setup and stuff, because human beings, we hate to be wrong. It's
we do hate to be wrong. I think
it is part of it's human nature.
Exactly.
And it's so interesting always like seeing that kind of thing, because like I've never watched Game of Thrones, but oh my gosh, hearing all the Game of Thrones like backlash and stuff online by the end was so funny to hear. Man, though, I'm impressed that they were able to do like that giant like fantasy sets. Also, I know this is gonna be jumping back in topics, but we were talking about like sci-fi earlier. One sci-fi like series that I love to see was I loved the new remade Planet of the Apes movies. Mm-hmm. I think those turned out so good visually and like story wise. It's so incredible and stuff.
Yeah, I haven't seen them. I've seen some of the behind the scenes with the facial tracking dots and everything.
That's so impressive. Yeah. Like doing motion capture in that way, and thinking of how far motion capture has come along from like when it was like the 2000s stuff. Because I remember when like one of the big things for motion capture was like Polar Express was like one of the first like motion capture animation films, and like we had like CGI hybrid stuff before, but like that felt like motion capture is such a weird technology to get to work and stuff. And I'm impressed by any filmmaker who actually like works on it, because I've seen like one motion capture, like purely motion capture film that's like worked out. That being Tintin, looks gorgeous. I thought the humans were like real in that movie when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But like a lot of it's technology for CGI and stuff is always so weird to get around.
Yeah. I see a lot of the things. I'm not a huge gamer, but I see in a lot of these cutscenes that are being shot for games, the way that they're accurately representing the actors who play the characters and bringing them into a 3D space is really incredible. And one of the shows that kind of is merging that that look with the filmmaking world is Love, Death, and Robots.
I've heard of that one.
Really, really incredible show. Some of the episodes don't love. Some of the episodes absolutely love. Some of the episodes in the middle. But I think it's undoubted that the artistic achievement that animation is able to come up with is incredible.
The thing with it too, and like I'm an animation junkie when it comes to it. That's like the main like field that I want to like work in writing for and stuff. By the end, but like the things like Spider-Verse was so incredible. That one like broke all the barriers on like I think animation. It's been really good to see things. Did you end up watching Arcane?
I did watch Arcane. Yeah,
oh my gosh, it looks so good and stuff too.
It did. I agree. One of the parts that I loved was in these periods where Jinx was like hearing voices and everything.
Yes,
there were these sketches, and it looked like they were hand drawn. I thought that was a really creative use of another medium being brought into a 3D animated world. The way they did particles like fire and water was kind of like harkened back to that 2D tradition, and I thought it worked really well in combination with the 3D.
I feel like it's really cool that we're getting these hybrid styles of like storytelling like becoming more of a thing. Is like the 2020s, I feel like technical wise was such a field for experimentation with film and stuff. And as much as like I have my gripes with the streaming market that we have now, where how it seems like every single company at this point, except for like Sony, every like major studio except for like Sony has their own streaming service at this point. And I think that's so weird to think about. But I do love that like streamers are able to take these risks on these much more deep projects, and I think it's really impressive, and I am really proud. And I'm just really proud to see them like taking these things. Oh my gosh, that show blew me away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think ultimately it's also going to lead to more opportunities for independent creators, independent writers and producers to contribute. I wouldn't say it's necessarily just like an open source platform as of now, but I think it's getting more in that direction as technology is able to get into the hands of more people, and we have more people that are able to get educated in production. There's going to be more content out there.
Well, we've seen such a development because the 2010s and stuff was such a big... It's weird saying the 2010s, by the way, like it's in the past, but it is in the past at this point in the year 2022. But like the 2010s brought like YouTube and stuff into like such a like limelight of like a way that people like make things and stuff. It's kind of cool that people can be their own like production companies essentially now and like start working themselves versus having to like just have a backing to get your work seen.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the monetary component of that still needs to be figured out, because the whole click per view type of thing, I guess, and I don't know if I can speak with a lot of authority on this, is also dependent on the amount of time that people watch the videos, and that's related to the amount of interest that people have in the videos. So if you've got a creator that is making content that people tend to click on for a shorter period of time, versus a creator where people are tending to click on their videos and watch all the way through, there's going to be a different monetary level associated with that, just based on the amount of time that people are on YouTube at all.
Right. Well, and the other thing is, so like it's encouraging, and I've loved what it's created, the boom of like the video essay and that kind of a format being able to thrive in this like kind of thing. But I do feel bad for like small like animators and stuff on the web, because I've seen a lot of videos talking about how with things switching to like watch time giving like your recommendations and stuff, because ultimately that's how YouTube makes their money with advertisements, because the more someone watches, the more ads they get to see, the richer YouTube's pockets get. It's just really fascinating kind of getting to see the changes get made within this. I feel like the idea of working for the algorithm and stuff is always such a fascinating it's a weird circumstance that a lot of companies or sites have to get going with and stuff.
Yeah, I find that the technology emerging around algorithms and interest mapping and advertisement curating simultaneously profound and terrifying.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know how to feel about it exactly. And I think a lot of people are in the same boat, because we're at this point where our technology is beginning to understand us in ways that we aren't entirely able to comprehend. I think when we understand that in the early ages of computers and the internet, we understood that if we put information on a hard drive, the information exists on the hard drive.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're dealing with, Web3, which is getting into decentralization. So questions are raised about, where is my information being stored? Who has access to that information, even though, despite the fact that it is decentralized among a bunch of different nodes.
Mm-hmm.
So questions regarding information, and not just hard data, but information about your browsing habits and what you like to see, what ads you respond to, are stored across platforms, and those platforms are communicating. So,
well, it's scary too, because like if you're not paying for anything, you are the product themselves, and the site's making money by getting your taste, and that's just it's so weird thinking of these like Silicon Valley companies and stuff have the IDs and be like, oh, profile, your name's Phineas and stuff, or like in my case, and then it just goes on and stuff. And I feel like it's going to be, in the growing decade, it's going to be even more of an issue than it was before, and we're probably going to see a lot of new conversations emerge about it, which is going to be interesting, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things is we don't have enough young people in government,
right?
Because we're the generation that is growing up with this stuff, and the individuals that are elected officials that are trying to create legislation about this kind of stuff did not grow up with it,
right?
And I feel as though it's a factor that can't be ignored. Somehow, I haven't fully thought through it, but
no, I haven't thought through a lot of like these things and stuff. This is a very off the cuff sort of like podcast and stuff, but like I always think that a thing within government and stuff, because it's like mainly, I don't even think we have like that many people who are technically considered millennials in government really yet. It's mainly like Gen X and the baby boomers still governing a world that's rapidly changed, in these past like 20 years more than it has in like the past 100, with how things like work, because like we didn't used to have giant or smartphones and stuff, which is so surreal to think about. That there was a time where you had a flip phone where it was just for calling, and now you have access to the entirety of the web on the go.
Yep. I mean, and that's the thing, is the world is innovating faster than it's ever innovated before. And it seems like every single week it's like a new breakthrough technology is emerging. And one of the other things that I feel desensitizes us to innovation.
Mm-hmm.
It's we see somebody start talking about neural interfacing with computers, and we're just like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, another tech company did another thing?
Right.
Oh, right. Yeah. Naturally, as one does.
Right.
Or like, what, I'm trying to think of like the other like weird things that we've seen, like, because there's probably something that happened this past week, but it's just impressive because like we don't see these things going on, and like with the pandemic and stuff going on, we've seen also like developments in health. Like I think the COVID vaccine was like the fastest vaccine that we've ever seen made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember hearing something like that. Yeah, I mean, FDA approvals going into clinical trials was one of the fastest, exceeding expectations and all that.
Well, we got to get out of a pandemic as soon as we hopefully can.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
As long as like people just like play things safe, which we're pretty lucky that we're in this state. But like it's gotta be scarier being in like other states around these times with.
Yeah. I mean, I know in many parts of the South, there's a huge nightlife culture that extends later than the hours that nightlife culture happens here, and a lot of us, the things associated with that having to do with COVID are that you just can't enforce masks in a crowded bar,
right?
During a pandemic, and also because bars are such an important part of tourism, especially in somewhere like Savannah. It's there's an ethical question of, do you let tourism and businesses take a hit, or do you, do something in the interest of public safety that is more harsh?
It's weird because it's like we've had other like pandemics and stuff, but it always feels like the government's moving on like treading new waters, because I think we haven't had like a pandemic this severe for like a long time.
Like 100 years. Yeah, I mean, like
Since,
1917 was like, was it the Spanish flu?
I that's what I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting thinking about it happening in like our lifetime again, because like I'm assuming you were in Savannah when the whole thing started, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, so because like I was in my senior year of high school, and it was so surreal because they were like, "Oh, you're going home for 2 weeks," or like it was like about to be spring break for some people like at our college, and then they were like, "Oh, you'll just have an extended break." No, they didn't.
Yeah. I remember that like terrifying pictures, like first COVID patient arrives in Washington or something on a plane, and it's it was just it was like, what's going on, and everyone was so freaked.
Yeah.
Some people were the big thing was like half of the people I know were so freaked out, and half of the people I know were like, I don't care.
Well, and the other thing is, since the last pandemic, we haven't had one of these kinds of forms of like mass communication, if that makes sense. Because like you usually in like past pandemics, social media didn't exist for that, but now everyone can like hear their own voices. I think one of those is my backpack, or the black one. This is going into the episode, by the way, guys. Just giving it a second.
Let me play a little intermediary.
Yeah.
There you go.
Thank you very much.
See,
I don't need your transitions, Anchor. We got transitions at home. The website that I uploaded the podcast to and stuff, you use like make your own episode, customize with little transitions and stuff. And I'm like, cool. I like to do it like in house more so. But thank you for offering, you lovely website. Dude, it's so weird that we got to the state where like anyone can upload their own podcast and stuff though. But like social media wise, right? In the past like era that we had of social media, we didn't have social media back in the last pandemic, and like no one else could give their opinions, because like now with social media being the thing, people are more vocal and stuff about how they think than ever before, which leads to a lot of like I think interesting situations when you have these things where people can be like, actually, I don't believe in the pandemic, and anyone can see that.
So a lot of people would say we're in an era called the post-truth era, where interpretation of truth itself and the process by which we come to factual conclusions about things is under scrutiny. And it's very difficult for people to communicate on that basis among many parts of our country, and especially in the age of the internet, because and I think just with the sheer amount of information that's available, it's already difficult to figure out why something is the way it is.
Yeah.
So, and we, like you said earlier, we don't like to be wrong. Another thing is we really like to trust people that we like. So we see somebody or we hear somebody that's compelling, and we tend to like to follow them tooth and nail, rather than having the ability to scrutinize some of the things that they say, agree with other things that they say, and become individuals in figuring out how we feel about things by ourselves. But yeah, it's a crazy idea, this whole post-truth situation. And again, I don't have a whole lot of authority to speak on it because I haven't studied post-truth a lot. But
same.
I think it's interesting how we come to our beliefs, why we develop beliefs, how our beliefs differ from other people. And that goes into questions about like epistemology and knowledge making, and what is a fact and what is truth and all that kind of stuff.
Such like big questions and stuff. Well, and the other thing that we've seen nowadays is because there's like this like influencer. I hate that word with every passion of my being. But the influencer culture of like following who you like online and stuff, we've gotten to see because of this like way into their lives. So many like people who are famous doing like things that are so stupid, like, and being like, you went out maskless in the middle of you went to a giant party with all your friends in the middle of a pandemic while we have like relatives like dying and stuff. And we're going into it's just been an interesting time period.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I think one of the things that I would say about influencers and commentators and people online is we tend to, well, the reality is we only see their idiosyncratic successes, so to speak. We don't see the process of failure by which the people that we appreciate online go through in order to come to the conclusions that they do.
Right.
So all we see is a confident, convicted, seemingly well-informed, conclusive argument that often, because these people are still human too, have to come to through trial and error.
Right.
So we're only seeing certainty. We're not seeing uncertainty. And that's a phenomenon that has to do with social media. Because when in a situation like this where we're interacting, we're trying to figure out, I guess, why each of us thinks a certain way.
Yeah.
And we're actively having a conversation, and it's not about one of us saying, here's my argument, and that's it, and that's all you have to work with. It's interactive, and that's that separation between people that makes it difficult for people to be face to face and especially see each other's reactions to things. We see that with cyberbullying, and we see that among online harassment in general. It's a similar phenomena.
Well, so the thing, and the reason why I've loved doing this show and stuff is I feel like podcasts and like interviews in particular are so much more off the cuff than like other forms of like communication with people, because like you can edit something when you think about whenever someone makes like a video or something, they edit it so much down to exactly what's the best like opinions, like with similar things to what you say, and it's just nicer to get that. I think you get to know someone more when you get their raw thought process versus the 10-minute versus the like the 1 minute thing that they spent 2 hours working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think just the thing with legacy media is just, especially if you're running for political office and you have like 3 minutes to make your argument, and during the 3 minutes you have an anchor interrupting you at every chance they can get, trying to, get a rise out of you. That gets so difficult for people to actually get to what the person is saying.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm a fan of this. Yeah.
It's something where we lack that like thing with a personal thing, because like I think one of my favorite things, I'm like a mad extrovert in the day-to-day world and stuff, and like my favorite thing about talking to a new person is you get a new opinion every single time you talk to someone. And what I like about it here is I think that it's a good chance to get new opinions and stuff too. That's why I set up like this podcast and stuff, because I wanted a weekly show, or like a hopefully weekly show. That's the better way to describe it, where you talk to someone new each time and you guys and more perspectives get to be shared onto the internet. And I think it's something fascinating about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
yeah, I totally agree.
Another topic. So I know about this from you because I know you outside of this podcast. This was not my first meeting with you. So, but you know a lot about philosophy. Do you have any philosophical topics that you'd love to talk about?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call myself a philosopher because I'm an undergraduate student in college,
that's valid,
but I think it piques my interest.
We'll talk about it at least.
So one of the topics that I think is interesting, one of the fields that I find interesting within the domain of philosophy, which is difficult to describe exactly what it is metaphysics. And metaphysics, containing the word physics, in Greek means something like, before the physics. So physics meaning the fundamental operations by which the world is structured that allows being to exist the way it does, analyzed at kind of like a mathematical level. Metaphysics has to do with questions of first causes. And by that, I mean, what is being? Why is the world something rather than nothing?
Right.
How do we separate an object from a subject? Does our consciousness and our perception have anything to do with how we perceive reality? So those questions are, I guess, justifiably considered before questions of physics. So here's the interesting philosophical hot take. Is anyone who's familiar with the movie The Matrix understands that there's a period of waking up into the real world. And once you've woken up, once you've taken the red pill, you have eventually realized that the entire world that you've that you've ever known is just a computerized, systematized construction. But the problem with that, and this is my position, is that we can never know whether or not we're in a matrix, because the reason is because it's possible theoretically that the process of realizing that we are in fact in a matrix is also a construction of the matrix. And if we were to go as far as to say the realization that it is a process of the matrix to realize that we have come out of the matrix is also a construction of the matrix, and that would just go on for infinity. So it's a paradox. That's kind of my position. Some people think, well, it's definitely possible we're living in a simulation. There's definitely multiple universe theories. I think until we have, I mean, and this goes back to the post-truth thing. Or let me say this: if we use the process of empiricism and logic to try to discover conclusions about metaphysics, we might get there. There's a possibility we might come to those sorts of conclusions, except for the conclusions that subvert rationality and subvert the empirical process. The idea, for example, and this is a Platonic idea of that there's several philosophers talked about it. Kant was another one who talked about it, that there's like a world in itself, that a cup doesn't necessarily exist. It's just a culmination of atoms, and the only reason that we have a cup is because all of us collectively share an idea of a cup that's separate from our being, and we apply it to certain constructions of molecules and atoms that we think fit that description. So that's kind of my position, is that the world we live in is a descriptive world. The world we live in is not a world of facts, of that through mathematical operations you can eventually figure out that, we have this taxonomy where we go from everything starts with physics, and then math, and then chemistry, and then biology, and then eventually somehow we get to consciousness. I don't think that's an accurate way of trying to figure out who we are as people, because I think that relies on an ontological, logic, fact-based driven operation, and as human beings, we're not rational beings at the complex level. We don't come to conclusions rationally. And because we are the ones who are engaging in the process of trying to figure out where we come from and why we think, it becomes difficult to make the argument as if we were computers. So it's, I think, not very self-fulfilling.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah, I guess so.
It's such a deep field and stuff, and I haven't even started to like think about that kind of stuff myself, but I feel like the metaphysics field and the why are we beings and stuff, those kinds of questions, it's just so interesting because it's such we've built such a world around that kind of a concept for our own oh my gosh, I'm getting flustered just thinking about it.
One of the ways to start thinking about it is the thing that I brought up a few minutes ago, was we have something rather than having nothing.
Right.
There is something and there is not something. So the question is, where does that something come from? And are you going to try to approach that something by reducing everything down? This is consciousness, this is biology, this is chemistry, this is math, and then eventually we get to quantum mechanics or whatever, or string theory, or whatever the next revolutionary idea in the sciences is. Or are you going to say, well, is that useful for me as a human on this planet to make a scientific rationale for things? And that's, I guess, we're getting into controversial territory here. I have problems both with the scientific worldview and the religious dogmatic worldview, because both of them, in my opinion, serve the same purpose. If somebody's going to make the fundamental assumption that everything is God, God is at the basis of everything, then what's the difference between that rationality and atomic subparticles are at the fundamental basis of everything, and everything is deterministic? everything is non-deterministic, whereas God is a deterministic, all-seeing, all-powerful force. In the practical application of our lives, what we really want is we want meaning, we want to be loved, we want to be accepted, we want to find community. And none of those things are found through rationality. Those things are found by being in touch with our feelings and other people's feelings and connecting through empathy. And that's a field that unfortunately the sciences have not penetrated yet. So it leads me to believe that if we're going to continue down the road of strict empirical science, we're also going to, in our emotional selves, continue down the road of increasing what does it mean? Why am I here? Why am I doing the things I'm doing? What's the purpose of my life? And those two roads tend to conflict with each other.
Yeah, no, well, it's interesting because there's like such like different like worldviews around like how we even function like as human beings. Because like I feel like if you ask anyone, people will be like, oh no, humans are emotional beings, and then there's a lot of people who will say, oh, humans are rational beings. But we're beings in some capacity, but it's probably some combination of the two. But I always feel like when it comes to like coming up with like a solution and stuff, people are more polarized towards one side instead of a combination of like multiple theses of the situation.
Yeah, and I think that's part and parcel of our rational response is we like to cling to rationality. That's why a lot of people will say, and I find this kind of interesting, sometimes compelling, that everybody is religious. There's nobody who is unreligious, just as there's nobody who is completely nihilistic, who doesn't believe in anything. There are people who are self-proclaimed nihilists that believe in nothing, and that's the difference between not believing in anything, which is the belief, nihilism, essentially the belief that nothing has purpose, there's no inherent meaning in life, everything is, we're a tiny speck floating through, nothing matters. And then there's the belief in nothing, which is sometimes linked to solipsism, the view that you are the only conscious entity in existence and everything else is a construction. But
it's good to know there's a name for that.
There is, yeah. So that form of nihilism, the belief in nothing, oftentimes is akin to belief in something. If nothing matters, then why not make the most of things? And that's why I'm always a big fan of existential philosophy, because the condition of existential philosophers is like, okay, well, if you don't have God to give you a result at the end of time that says you're going to have either eternal life or eternal suffering, then how do you reconcile being on the planet? What's the purpose of your life? And I think the optimistic response is, well, I'm here, so why not make the most of it? Why not do things that not just make me happy, but make me feel fulfilled?
I feel like with another thing with ourselves is with the amount of time that humans like are here in the grand scheme of things. I feel like it's good for us to like think about just doing something for us while in the now too, because like if you do things only for like other people, then what's the purpose of like your life individually? I think is that a weird way to think about it, or?
Yeah, well, no, I no, it's not at all. Because you've got the person you spend the most time with is yourself, so you better be your best friend.
Yeah,
that's a good way to think about it. And also putting yourself in that frame of mind also is very similar to the way that Buddhism works, or Buddhist asceticism more specifically, or through meditation. A lot of people can, I haven't gotten to this point, been able to access sort of the deconstruction of the ego, of the self. And you start doing that by realizing that you are not your feelings. You are not yourself. You're an entity within yourself that is perceiving the experience of living in your body. And you're stuck with your body, and you're stuck with your the feelings and the thoughts and the rationalities that pass through your head. So a lot of the time, the way Buddhism says to deal with that is to understand that you are not the feelings. You are not the experience of being you. You are an individual that is perceiving that experience. And in the Rastafarian religion, oftentimes people will refer to themselves as I and I, and that means there's two forms of I. I being the physical being that's connected with all of nature and all of reality. And then there's I, that is the entity of consciousness that's perceiving being you. So that oftentimes can help people connect with a more overarching, unified sense of being, rather than being chained down to all of our insecurities and all of our shortcomings and all of our doubts about ourselves.
Right. Yeah, no. Oh my gosh. There's just so much to think about there. And the whole thing about like religion and stuff with its construction, it's so interesting, like its role in society too, as we try to like perceive through it like life. Because when you think about it, like I'm one of those people where it's like I'm not personally like I consider myself to be atheist, but it's always interesting finding out what other religions are like thinking on like on situations and how they all like kind of interconnect at the same time about philosophies and like how the world works. It's just absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, I guess my position would be I consider atheism to be an open form of religion.
Right.
Where the meaning of your life doesn't have to be constrained to one axiom of belief. The meaning of your life can be constrained to, and I think this is the thing that atheists have to be careful about is figuring out where the purpose comes from. And that, in my opinion, is an experience that's religious. You're figuring out why do you keep going? Why do you keep doing things? And you can say, well, because maybe someday I want to do this. I want to have, I don't know, typical example, nice car, nice house, good family, things like that. And that's a goal that you are putting forth in the future and saying, I'm going to live my life in accordance with the possibility that maybe one day I'll have that. So that's one way to think about it.
Well, it's so interesting because like everyone goes down our own like life paths for like different purposes in the end. Like a lot of people go to college and they're like, "Oh, I'm just going to do the job that's going to give me the best amount of money so I can do the most things on my own." And then there's other people like I'm assuming where people like this, where it's like going into film, it's like doing something that makes you feel fulfilled for your day-to-day life within a job, because we only have so many hours that we like get to spend in the world. Because like when you think about it, there's like I think of it as there's kind of like three major like currencies in the world: monetary or like physical currency. There's the currency of time that we get and stuff, and the time and the relationships also that we have with each other and stuff, and like and life kind of works on those three intersections and stuff with each other with any interaction that we go through.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I don't know if there's many like other ones that like that count for that, but I think those are like the major three that like.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good way to reduce it. The only alteration I might make is that maybe monetary currency is currency in the form of exchange in general. Exchange in material objects.
That's
in sustenance. It's like, if I give you some of my resources, some of my food, shelter, whatever, then that's a form of trust, of giving, of
and it's just interesting because like, well, when you exist like within the world, it's just I'm only flustered because it's just interesting thinking like about all this like existential stuff that, of how much stuff like goes beyond and how much will go over our own heads and stuff as we like develop. It's just kind of incredible.
Yeah. I think one of the next big revolutionary shifts that we're going to have in the way we understand the world is not going to be from some scientific achievement, or it's not going to be from some political revolution. I think it's going to come from the field of psychology, in understanding ourselves.
I honestly feel like that is going to be a big thing too, because we're starting to move into an era where it's like we've seen like conversations about mental health like starting to emerge as like major things, when previously like I feel like the conversations around mental health have been such a major thing starting 2010s-ish. Like the 2000s, I feel like mental health conversations were still in the background, but we've started to have more and more conversations about that and the way to keep yourself doing okay in the end, which is something that's really incredible to see. And I think psychology is like gonna definitely like lead to one of these things. I feel like the social sciences are such a great field to go into. And I know psychology kind of bends both social science and normal sciences, but like understanding how people work is gonna lead to. I agree with you so much that it's gonna lead to so many new developments.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the big important steps that I think has been being taken in the realm of mental health is a rhetorical shift in understanding that people who struggle with mental health, it's not their fault,
Right.
You know, it's that their brain works in a way that's unique to them, and the expectations that the world puts on us sometimes don't line up perfectly with the way people's brains work. And the solution to that is to create opportunities that are beneficial and helpful for accommodating specific ways that people think, for neurodivergence. And I think people are really waking up to that, and I'm optimistic to that. One of the other things, and this is especially a big thing that has to do with Western culture, specifically American culture, is we're so obsessed with extrovertedness. We're so obsessed with our images, and social media has completely exacerbated that, because we think that the way to do well in a career, and there's some truth to this just because of the way that our system is organized, is to present yourself super well, to be assertive, to ask for things, to come off as strong and independent and ready to take action, when in reality that's only the case for a very specific amount of job opportunities.
Right.
So when that and life opportunities in general. So when that ideology trickles down to different realms, we start to think that in order to perform well at a specific job, regardless of if the job requires assertiveness, that you need to be assertive. So yeah, I think one of the important things is recognizing, and this is something that's true in a lot of Eastern countries, is that compassion and humbleness, staying humble, and having a work ethic that is not tainted by your striving for achievement and goal-orientedness is possibly a more efficient and more accepting way to go about your life ambitions. We want to be trustworthy with each other. We don't want to be scared of each other.
Yeah, no, and especially like knowing like my field and stuff, like films, one where it's built on like assertiveness, because it's not usually the right voices that like get their voices across. It's the ones that can speak the loudest and be like, well, actually, this is how it should work and stuff. But so
I would say that in certain situations that type of behavior is necessary, and in situations of safety, and in situations of having to do with, well, I mean, it's a difficult conversation when you get around scheduling and time, but I'll stick to situations of safety. Assertiveness, I think, is important in safety. If you're having a group of people standing around deliberating about whether or not something's safe, oftentimes it's more important for somebody to take action and say, that's not safe, whether or not it is safe.
Right.
So I think in those specific instances, it is important. But, if you are a person that is in a field where that quick decision-making, assertiveness, fight or flight response behavior is not essential, then why, what's the purpose of relying on it for levels of competence?
And honestly, it's one of those things where it's just interesting the interactions that assertiveness has in the world, because usually like with politics, like politicians are usually the people who are like some of the most assertive people out there, who are very loud about their own opinions, and that's how we've wound up basically defining how a lot of the world works. And by the way, thank you. This has been such a good topic and such a good podcast so far.
Yeah, of course. I've had a good time.
I'd like to move us to one final topic for the conversation. So, we worked on a documentary together last semester, Frontiers. It's not out yet to the public, but it's pretty not too bad. You agree? But it talked a lot about space, and I was kind of curious what your thoughts are about like life beyond and stuff, our planet.
So I have an interesting response to this, is that I'm finding the argument for a field called, or a discipline called panpsychism, pretty interesting. And so panpsychism is basically the idea that consciousness doesn't have to be, well, one, there's two parts. One, consciousness doesn't have to be restricted to beings that embody our view of consciousness as we do. So we think we have a taxonomy of consciousness in our world. We think, humans are conscious, primates are conscious, felines, canines are conscious, fish are conscious. But then it gets into the field of like algae. Are algae conscious? Are single-celled organisms conscious? Are trees conscious?
Right.
Are rocks conscious?
Right.
So, and there's a certain line, and it's a fuzzy line still, but when we get to that point, it's like, how do we define consciousness? And that's a whole different conversation. But I think a compelling argument is, is there life apart from our world the right question to ask? I think the right question to ask is, what constitutes as life? And maybe life is so vastly different than it is here, and in the way that we perceive what life is, that we just don't see it as life.
Right.
We might see it as a rock floating through space, but in reality, maybe it's tens of billions of years old, and its perception, to the degree that it has a perception, and its conceptualization of time is phenomenologically viable over a much longer period of time. So we can't interact with it. And this also goes into the idea that time is an illusion, right? Time is not constant for all beings. Different entities have different perceptions of time. So how can we say in our 80-something years of life that our experience of the duration of time constitutes or is tied with consciousness, where an entity floating through space that lives, quote unquote, lives for hundreds of billions of years, if we assume that hundreds of billions of years is an acceptable duration of time to put the universe in, has the same ability to comprehend and express consciousness like we do.
Right.
So the other part of panpsychism is that not that consciousness exists among all entities and all levels of being, but that consciousness is the fundamental level of being. And that's only true insofar as we can describe it that way. For example, if we take a rock or a pebble, like I was talking about earlier, we don't see it as its constituent atoms, its constituent atomic structure. We see it as a rock. We also don't see an individual pebble as a gravel driveway. Say we pick the pebble off a gravel driveway. The pebble is not the gravel driveway. The pebble is also not the construction of atoms. There's a specific limit to where we consider it itself, and not its constituent elements, and itself, on the other side, itself and not similar elements to it. So the transfer of information is really what we're talking about when we're talking about consciousness existing at the fundamental level of being. So the ability for an atom to move and interact with other atoms and combine with other atoms, and for electrons and protons and neutrons to do the same thing, is a form of consciousness in that it constitutes our boundaries and our descriptions of what something is, of what a element is. And that's part of the problem with that, is that it's a conception of, it's part of a human construction.
Right.
But that's I guess a compelling way to think about it, to get back to the original part of your question.
It's just so interesting to think of like what's beyond and what we don't even think about as humans, because it's so funny because like we only do live our one life, and it's so weird thinking that there could be like other kinds of lives that other things are like are living, and
or is the entire universe its own conscious entity? It's a sense of scale. We only have a sense of scale based on our own extremely limited human perception. It's like a very small. It's like we're looking at the Milky Way galaxy through like a straw, and there's so much more to see, but our ability to perceive as human beings is so limited, theoretically.
Well, that's absolutely fantastic. I just want to say thank you again for coming on the show today.
Yeah, of course, it's my pleasure.
It's been great having you, and it's been great having conversations with you about this, or about like It's just been great having conversations with you in general. And thank you so much for being the very special guest for this episode, Ethan.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
No problem. And for anyone listening, thank you so much for checking this one out. I hope you enjoyed it, and you enjoy the very special guest. He's been a great guest.
Thank you. I hope you have a lot of success with guests in the future, and I'm excited to hear who else you have on.
We're gonna have some very, very special guests going forward. Cool. You are also a very, very special guest.
Thank you.
All the varies.
All right.